Jesus also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, was praying thus, "God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of all my income." But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even look up to heaven, but was beating his breast and saying, "God, be merciful to me, a sinner." I tell you, this man went down to his home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exalted. The word of the Lord. So this is a short parable, and on the surface it seems very straightforward and to the point. We're tempted to sum up the entirety of this parable in its first and last lines. In the first, the author of Luke tells us that Jesus told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. And we listen for that, so that we know how to remedy it, so that we won't fall into the same trap. And in our efforts to get to the point, we often skip over to the last line. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exalted. Easy enough, we got it. We need to be humble. The end. When I was in the 3rd grade, the latest in cool school supplies was the Trapper Keeper. And unless you don't know what the Trapper Keeper was, it was really just a glorified 3-ring notebook with a flap over the outside edge so that if you carried papers in your notebook that weren't clipped in, they wouldn't fall out as you carried it. Now, all the kids wanted one, including me. And so when my parents finally gave in and decided that my brother and I could go to the store and pick one out, we were excited. Now, my brother knew exactly which one he was going to get. It was rather boring, in my opinion. He got the red one with the white trim. I was less decisive. I looked at all of them before I finally chose one, with my mother over me saying, "You need to hurry." The one I chose had a tiger on the front. It covered the whole front, and it was beautiful. But what really sold me were the words at the bottom, printed in white letters. It's hard to be humble when you're perfect. So needless to say that this parable is a hard one for me to hear. Not that I think that I'm perfect, far from it. I have learned quite a bit since the 3rd grade. Rather, I'm not sure that any of us can really be humble. I mean, wouldn't admitting that we are humble kind of disqualify us from actually being humble? And then for another thing, to be humble, to show humility, means that we have a low view of our own importance. And that in itself is confusing, especially when we talk about sharing the Christian message. What if the Apostle Paul or even Peter had a low view of their importance in sharing the gospel? Where would we be today? At some level, I think we must think that our beliefs, our witness, our actions, and our testimony is important. Otherwise, we wouldn't believe it, say it, do it, right? And finally, I'm not sure that this parable is really about our need to be humble, at least not in the ways that we typically think of it. I believe most people try hard in their lives to be good people. Now, what we determine as being good and how we go about seeking that can be different. But I think most people truly want to be good people. I know I do. I try hard to be a good person, to be a good Christian, to be a good pastor, wife, mother, friend. And I guess I want that to make a difference. The fact that I try hard to be good, I want it to count for something, even if it's just a little something, like a jewel in my invisible crown, or maybe a mark in the book of heaven, or heck, I'd even settle for a sticker on the behavior chart that's gathering dust somewhere under a bed in my house since my children got too old to care that it was there. I want my effort to count for something. Or maybe I just don't want it to count for nothing, which makes me not that different than the Pharisee. I mean, I don't go around saying things like, "Thank you, God, that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, and even a tax collector." But when you get right down to it, I am thankful that I'm not on a path that leads to any of those things. And that's one of the things that makes this parable so hard. So what the Pharisee was saying, what he was praying, it was probably true. He was thankful that he had chosen a different path, that he wasn't stealing or stirring up trouble in places where he shouldn't have been, or womanizing, or making his living off of extorting other people. He was being honest about the things for which he was really thankful, and you would think that God would value his honesty. See, Pharisees, they were good people during the time that Jesus would have told this parable. They were the upholders of religion. They were the ones who consistently gave to the poor. They were the ones who prayed regularly for everyone in the community. They were the ones who would have been the first to respond to any kind of community crisis. They were the ones who refused to give up on God even when the Romans insisted that they should. So when Jesus tells this parable, it would have been surprising for the people to hear in that if a Pharisee couldn't go home from the temple after praying, being justified for when they were so good, well, then everybody else must be doomed. Which is also a reason it would have been shocking to hear Jesus throw in, not everyone is doomed. See, this tax collector, this person that you don't even like to think about, he is indeed justified. That would not have seemed right in the audience's eyes. He was, after all, still a tax collector, working for the enemy, making his living and his livelihood off of forcing other people to pay more than what they owed. Now, in this parable, Jesus tells us quite a bit about the Pharisee and the tax collector. They're both in the temple praying. They both thought they needed God. In both the Pharisee's prayer and the tax collector's prayer, there is this raw honesty. When the Pharisee prays, he recognizes what everyone else recognizes about him. Yes, he is good, and he does good things. He'd be what we might call today a pillar of the church. Someone who's always there, always volunteering for something, always giving of their time and their efforts and of their money, not just their fair share, but maybe even a little more than their fair share. And everyone would have probably agreed that all of his goodness would make God desire him. The tax collector is also honest in his prayer. He recognizes what everyone else recognizes about him. He is a sinner in need of mercy. His not-so-goodness makes him pretty sure, along with everyone else, that his best shot of God wanting anything at all to do with him would make him rely on God's complete and utter mercy. A Pharisee and a tax collector both go up to the temple to pray. Both of them are caught up in the systems and in the stories of which they are a part. We're told that the Pharisee plays his part well, contributing to society in both deed and money. The tax collector also plays his part well. We can assume as much because others despise him. They are both seeking something from God. That's why they pray. Both rather accurately tell God who they are, and both recognize who they are by what they do. And both are honest about that in their prayers. And then one of them requests mercy. The difference between them is hardly any difference at all. And yet, difference is the only thing that one of them can see. He is so bound to the system of which he plays a part that he must tell God about all of his good deeds, for he doesn't know who he is without them. He does not know he is a beloved child of God already. He cannot acknowledge or honor the Christ in anyone else because he cannot acknowledge or honor the Christ in himself apart from what he does and what he gives and how the world views him. He can't even remember when or how he forgot to dream dreams and see visions and prophesy about the world he knows God intends. And even while he gives thanks to God, he's stuck in this system that doesn't permit him to be alive. He must tell God that he is vigilant in his devotion and plans to continue to be, so that he can either convince God or himself of his worth. The other is also stuck in the same system. so deadened by all of it that when he stands before God, the only thing he can do is plead for mercy. And yet, this knowledge of all the dead places that exist in his life, well, it gives him this freedom. It gives him a freedom to say all the dreams that have died such long deaths, all the visions that he has never painted, all the words that have never been prophesied from his lips. Give him this freedom. So the tax collector isn't vigilant and promising God anything. He's not sure. He doesn't promise to amend his ways or be a better person or quit his job or throw himself at the mercy of those from whom he has taken money. But unafraid, with this freedom, he holds up all the dead places in his life as an offering to God. God, be merciful to me, a sinner. And Jesus tells us, this is the one who's justified. See, through this parable, we begin to understand what Jesus will soon show us when he reaches his final destination at Jerusalem. That resurrection can only begin to happen when we know we are dead. Jesus tells this parable to wake people up, to help us come alive. Are we going along, giving, doing, thanking, praying, all while holding so tightly to all the dead places in our lives that we can't open up and grasp hold of the dreams and visions that God places right before us? I think Jesus sets us up in this parable. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. And already we're caught up in the system, caught up in the story. We want to see their differences and choose sides and decide which one we're like. But that story is dead. Will we dare to let its ending offer us life? For that is the beginning. Amen.